Welcome to the lecture on global variables. So if you go to the variable and constant folder, go to example 9. Let's open these two files. So part of this lecture we will create 3 examples. First we'll define global variables and compare it with local variable. Then we'll understand what is the purpose of a global variable here. Then we'll try to replicate one error to see how the global variable will affect inside the function. Then we'll see the right way to access the global variable inside the function. So this way you will learn how to work around with global variables. So let's create these files and then we'll understand each of these concepts. So we'll create 3 samples. So I'll say sample 1 is this, and we'll try to use the same code that we have developed for local variables and we'll try to convert it into a global variable. So we'll define a variable of type name and we'll try to print this name. Okay, so nothing fancy. I defined a variable, defined a method to print. Let's print this variable as well in the method. Then I'm printing that variable. We have seen this example previously, so we'll start working from here. Okay, so we're able to see PHP first, then Srini. So if you have to define a global variable, what you do is you name it as a keyword called as global, and when you define a variable as global, it becomes a global variable. Means it can be accessed from anywhere. And if you have to define a global variable, you have to first define it, then assign it. Okay, that's the rule of defining a global variable. So this is called as defining the global variable. This is assigning the global variable. Okay, so now the name becomes a global variable, and once the print function change that value of a global variable, let's see what happens. So this function also have a variable called name, and then we have a global variable called name. So let's see what happens when a method have its own variable name matching up with the global variable. Okay, there's no difference. Even though you have a global variable, you are not accessing via the function, right? And then whatever you are defining the variable is actually local to this function. Even though the name global is a global variable, in the function you have the same name. This variable basically is a local variable to this function, and it doesn't really affect with the global variable. So understand this concept, wherein even if you have a global variable, function has a variable same name, it will overwrite, means this variable will be created in this scope and it will die off when the function is finished executing. Okay, so let's run through in second example when we'll try to access the global variable inside the function. Okay, so let's go and do that. Copy this code and we'll say sample2. Here we will define another message variable, and when you define a global variable, you don't assign a value right away. You define it first, then you assign the value. Let's try to print this. And this time we will echo the message. and then we'll also call this method, and then we'll echo message. Right, pretty simple to understand. We have a global variable and we are trying to print it. Previously we created one global variable and we created another variable inside the function, so it doesn't really change the global variable. So this time we didn't do that. We just trying to access the global variable from the function. So let's see what happens, whether this function is able to access this global variable, because we are not defining it, we're just trying to print it. So let's go to scope 2, and if you notice it from welcome to PHP, you should be getting welcome to PHP twice, right? Because first time is from your method, second time is the echo. So looks like your global variable, you're unable to access a global variable even though it's defined as global. So there's one rule that you have to remember: even though you define a global variable, the function cannot access that global variable. In the next example, let's try to access this message from the function. Okay, so for that I'm going to create one more file. Copy this up, we'll use it as same example, sample 3. We'll call it message 1. Okay, the only thing that you have to do is you have to mention this is a global variable. Okay, and then we'll try to print it. Okay, now you can see the welcome to PHP actually coming up from here. I'll say PHP 1. Yeah, so these two are basically coming up first from the function and then from the echo. So now we are able to access the message variable from the function, because we defined as a global and we are saying, okay, I want to use the global variable and give me the value. So what happens if I change this global variable inside the method? Okay, let's try that. So I'm trying to change the global variable inside the function. Okay, let's execute that. So you see the value is changed even after the function. So once you come out of the function, the variable still holds whatever you have set inside the method, and then it's trying to print that value. Okay, so this is a good understanding that when you have a global variable and you want to access global variable from the function, you have to redefine the same variable as with the keyword global, and then you can start using the global variable. You have to know when to use global variable keyword and how to access a global variable from the method itself. Okay, so that's all for this section on global variable, and I'll see you in the next one.